the time. My name is Ben Goldstein. I am the Senior Program Manager for Commercial Building Decarbonization here at the Colorado Energy Office. And in this role, I'm primarily working on the Building Performance Colorado program, which is, of course, the topic of today's webinar. Along with me today, I have Julia Perboner, who's the program manager for commercial buildings at the Energy Office, a relatively recent hire, but she's been here a couple months now and has been a really big help for us. And I also have Blake Martin and Kudret Utbe from the ICF team on as well, assisting. And the ICF team is our help center vendor team, and they do a great job responding to everyone's questions and helping us with a bunch of other things. So the focus of today's presentation or webinar, I guess you could say, is the legislative changes. Obviously, there have been a lot of, there's major legislation passed in the most recent legislative session for the state that modifies a lot of the ways that this program is, the Building Performance Colorado program works. Before we get started, I will note that we did hold a first round of this webinar on July 17th. That has been posted. The recording and the slides have both been posted on the recorded training webinar. If someone's able to, Julia or ICF team, if someone can drop a quick link into that, into the chat, so people know where to find that if that's of interest to you. So we did go through most of these changes in pretty good depth last time. So I'll probably just touch on the changes that we talked about last time, provide some updates, but leave the bulk of this time open to answer questions. And if you want more details on any of these changes, I would definitely, you can either reach out to us or you can watch the recording or read through the slides of the first version of this webinar that we presented about 5-6 weeks ago now, that Blake just posted in the chat. So just to note that, going to go through some of the changes that we've already discussed pretty quickly, talk about what we've done since the last time we talked, and queue up some of the next things that we have planned. So I would ask, you can throw questions in the chat as they come up. We're going to leave the bulk of this presentation, hopefully get through everything I have to present by about 11:30 or so, and then leave the bulk of the time open to take questions from the audience. So you can feel free to save them to the end or put them in the chat as they come up. And with that, we'll get into it. Just want to confirm everyone can still see my screen, right? Sometimes it only shows the first slide. So can everyone see the legislative update slide? Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
Great, thanks. Appreciate that. So this is the new legislation, House Bill 25-1269. As mentioned, was recently passed. This was back in May now that it was passed by the state legislature and signed into law by Governor Polis. And there's a couple things happening in this bill, but primarily it's about modifying the Building Performance Colorado program. And here I've outlined most of the major changes from this legislation. Again, I'll go through these pretty quickly, but just so everyone's, aware of what the changes are, I'll reiterate them here. So the most significant change that people have probably taken note of already is that in the original statute, there were interim 2026 targets that needed to be met, as well as 2030 building performance targets. With this change, the 2026 targets are not going away, but rather it's more of an aspirational goal rather than a firm target. So this should give building owners additional time to come into compliance and meet the 2030 targets, and there are no penalties for non-compliance with the 2026 targets. So really just encouraging everyone to look forward to 2030 and to meet their assigned targets for that year. This legislation also allows building owners to use 2019 as a baseline year rather than 2021. I'll get into the details of all these in a little bit. The reporting period due date, previously the reporting period ran from March 1st through June 1st every year. The statute set the end date for the reporting period every year as November 1st, so it will happen later in the year. It also allows for deemed compliance for buildings subject to local building performance standards. Again, I'll get into all the details of this in a little bit. There's an established new Building Decarbonization Enterprise Fund, which once set up and funded will provide additional funding and technical assistance to building owners. There's a defined process to establish the 2040 building performance targets. The legislation also is a defined operator for Building Performance Colorado purposes and outlined benchmarking requirements for operators as opposed to just building owners. We're also now allowed building centers that have a data center incorporated into the building, not a whole building data center, but rather a building where some section of the building is a data center, that don't meet the current mixed use criteria can request individualized targets now. And one thing that we didn't note last time that I will spend a little bit more time getting into, since we didn't mention it in the first go round of this webinar, was that there are questions for building owners to respond to as part of the annual benchmarking reporting. So we'll start digging into these now. Again, the most notable change, I think, from this legislation is that the 2026 targets have no penalties for non-compliance associated with them anymore. So it's important to note that they're not going away, but rather there's no penalties for not achieving these targets. So I would suggest using 2026 targets as sort of a benchmark, no pun intended, to see where you're at and how you're tracking towards 2030. But really encourage everyone to focus on the 2030 targets, since these are the ones that will have, penalties for non-compliance associated with them. And as mentioned, this gives building owners additional time to fully understand what's required of them and plan for 2030, which is still, several years away, obviously. And there's also additional funding and resources that we're planning to make available over the next few months and years, including the Building Decarbonization Enterprise Fund that I mentioned earlier, as well as some other things which we can talk about. And I also think it's important to note that the 2030 targets are not changing. So I think this is a good compromise and win-win, gives building owners time to fully understand what's required of them and take advantage of some more resources we're going to make available in the not too distant future, but also keeps the 2030 targets as originally intended, so that the state should still be tracking towards achieving the emissions reductions goals and requirements set forth by the governor's office and by various decarbonization roadmaps that have been released by the state. And again, sorry, I'm going to run through these first ones pretty quick since we went over them in more depth the first time, but just wanted to key them up for everyone. So another major change from this legislation is that building owners can now set their baseline year as 2019 instead of the original 2021 baseline. This has to be done by November 1st, 2027. So should note, this is only allowable and only really necessary for building owners who have selected one of the standard percent compliance pathways, as opposed to one of the property type target pathways. This is because the property type doesn't really take the baseline of your building into account. It's more just about achieving reductions based on the type of building you are, office, mixed use building, some sort of industrial facility, etc. Whereas the standard percent reduction targets are just a straight reduction of your energy use intensity or your greenhouse gas intensity from your 2021 baseline, and people can choose whichever pathway they want. We're working on getting the compliance pathway change form updated. I'll speak to that a little bit more later. But please note that you're only able to do this, only need to do this if you've opted into one of the standard percent reduction compliance pathways. And we're working on an update to allow BEAM to do this, and I'll have some more details about that in a little bit. So the reporting period deadline has also changed here. As I mentioned previously, it was March 1st through June 1st every year. It'll now be July 1st through November 1st. So in our first iteration of this meeting, we noted that the statute set an end date for the program year, but did not set a start date for the program year. We have decided that July 1st through November 1st will be the new annual reporting period. This is to keep it in line with the state fiscal year, so we can't really cross over fiscal years. We considered making it longer, maybe starting earlier in the year, just give people more time to get their information together. Unfortunately, we were told we can't have the reporting year cross over state fiscal years, because that causes a whole bunch of issues for how we collect the fee payments and use the fee payments, because technically anything collected in the previous fiscal year needs to be utilized in that year, and that obviously just doesn't make sense for a program that's midstream. So the plan is to make it July 1st through November 1st every year, and this extends the reporting period by 1 month, so there's a little bit more time to come into compliance, and it happens later in the year, so hopefully people have more time to get their energy use information from the utility as needed, or from their tenants if that's something that you have to do. So hopefully this is a welcome change for people to happen a little bit later in the year and have the reporting period be a little bit extended from what it was previously. So to discuss deemed compliance, CEO now has the ability to review the details of local BPS programs and determine if the local program will yield emissions reductions that meet or exceed what will be achieved by the state program, Building Performance Colorado. If we, after doing that analysis, we decide that it does, buildings subject to both BPC and a local program will only have to meet the local program BPS targets. So we received a lot of feedback that, especially the main one that people are concerned about with this is Energize Denver. Of course, the city and county of Denver's BPS and benchmarking program. We're still working on the review for the Energize Denver program, but that's underway at this point. And we expect that it will meet this criteria. We still have to do the analysis to be sure, but assuming that it does, and for any future BPS programs that come online, if you're a covered building, according to the rules and regulations for both programs, if it meets the deemed compliance criteria, you will only have to meet performance targets for the local program, and then you'll be automatically in compliance with the state's BPS side of things, which will, I think, is really important for building owners. It's not fair or reasonable to ask you to work towards two sets of different but very similar targets. So just having one target, as long as it meets, again, this emissions reductions criteria, I think will be a welcome change for all people. So important to note, building owners still have to report their benchmarking and pay annual fees to the state. So that part of it won't change significantly no matter what happens with the evaluation. But there's only one set of actual performance targets to focus on, again, once we actually complete this review. This is another major change, the Building Decarbonization Enterprise Fund. This was outlined in statute. This will be an enterprise board, that's comprised of 9 members, have representatives from state government, local government, residential and commercial building owner representatives, a building energy efficiency expert, and someone from the utility company, as well as someone from CEO, from CDPHE, and from the Public Utilities Commission. So a pretty well-rounded group. The board members must be appointed on or before September 1st, so obviously very soon. The first meeting will occur shortly thereafter, most likely sometime mid to end of September, once everyone's been appointed and notified and we can find a time that works for everyone. So how this will work, it will be funded by a new annual $400 per covered buildings fee for every covered building owner. We're still debating when exactly that first collection date will happen. I'm waiting for some feedback from some higher level folks on that one. But obviously this is a pretty significant additional financial requirement for building owners. But I think the great thing about this board is that it's set up in such a way, and it's been set up as an enterprise rather than just another line item for CEO's total budget, is that as setting it up by an enterprise, all the money invested into this fund and into this enterprise has to be used for the express and sole purpose of benefiting the people that pay into it and giving building owners additional resources and opportunities to understand their targets and come into compliance with the BPS requirements for the state. All items are going to be determined by the board and voted upon by the board members themselves. So it won't just be CEO deciding what should happen. It'll be voted on by the board. And so can't say exactly what it'll fund yet, because obviously the board needs to meet and convene and vote on how it should be used. But this should be things like additional financing programs, better technical support, perhaps incentives, things like maybe helping to fund audits, hopefully some additional equity things. So we'll have more details on that once the board starts meeting. Obviously not a lot to say about the exact use that will happen with it, but I think this is, obviously there's more money that is required from building owners here, but again, it has to be used just to benefit the building owners who pay into it. And I think this will unlock a lot of additional opportunities for us, which is really important, especially as, there's state budget issues to worry about, and federal funding is very much up in the air in a lot of cases now. So this is a new funding stream and funding source that I think will really, really help everyone. So I'll touch very briefly on the 2040 target establishment, just to say that a process for this has been established. It's still several years away. There's a task force of 16 different members. That's very similar to the Building Enterprise, or the Decarbonization Enterprise Board, but even more expansive and more diverse. So this will start meeting in mid-2027, as outlined here. And the task force will consider the actual benchmarking data for the duration of the program up to that point, as well as, crucially, the economic impact of potential standards. There's something in the law specifically that says the 2040 targets and the task force needs to account for technological and economic feasibility of making some of these upgrades to create, 2040 targets that are both ambitious and help us to get to where we need to be and, mitigate the worst impacts of climate change, while also not breaking the bank and making it targets that are actually possible and reasonable for people to achieve. So not too much else to say about this now. This is still a few years away, but there has been a process established for how 2040 targets will come about. So we can certainly talk more about that in the coming years, but not as much an immediate focus, obviously. The new legislation also defined operator for Building Performance Colorado, and I've quoted right here from the statute. Operator means an owner, tenant, or other individual or entity occupying or named on the utility bill for a covered building and has access to the utility data for a covered building. So essentially, this change was added because we received a lot of feedback from building owners that oftentimes the utility that they're working with doesn't have the ability or doesn't want to, for whatever reason, provide them directly with the energy use information, or the tenant or operator is getting the energy use information but is unwilling or unable for some reason to share it with the building owner to report. And obviously, if a building owner isn't able to access the energy use information, there's no way they can be expected to comply with the benchmarking requirements here. And so this change named what is an operator. It's not always a tenant. It can be the building owner, but it's really the individual or entity that's named on the utility bill and has access to the utility data. So tenants of buildings can no longer say, well, I'm not the building owner, so I don't have to report this. They are now required to report the benchmarking data either directly to the building owner, so they can share it with the building owner and the building owner can submit it on their behalf, or we'll set up a process to allow the operator to provide that directly to the state if that's preferable. So we're still working on exactly how this will work, but this is a change that was outlined in the legislation, and I thought it was important to mention. And this is something we, like I said, still have to figure out exactly how this will work, but we'll have this figured out before the start of the 2026 reporting period. I queued up at the beginning. There's some new eligibility for individualized targets. Right now, the individualized target process is very limited in who is actually eligible and who can apply. We're working on getting the form and process and guidelines out for that within the next week or so. It's taken a little longer than we wanted. There's some back and forth that we had to have about it, but it's moving forward, and the form should be available for everyone soon. The new building owners or situations that can apply for this, and quoting again directly from the law, building owners that demonstrate a significant increase in energy use due to the expansion of a data center or telecommunications operations within the building can request an individualized target. So we still need to work to define the process, the required documentation for this, and so we're going to release this in the next couple months. But this is a new thing that's available for building owners that meet this criteria. So the individualized target form that'll be released soon will not have this information. There'll be a caveat in there about how we're still working on putting this together, just because it's a little bit more complicated than some of the other processes that we already have established. But this is something that we're working on and should be available hopefully in the next couple months. And so this one I'll spend a little bit more time on, because this is not something that we covered in the first webinar. So there are now questions that building owners need to respond to in addition to submitting their benchmarking information and paying the annual fees on an annual basis. There's a few questions each year that need to be responded to. So these questions include how the building owner is tracking towards BPS compliance, if they would benefit from technical assistance, and if there's any barriers preventing building owners from achieving compliance, as well as any trends that they're seeing across the market, if that's something you want to say. We're going through a couple options for how to best collect this information. The goal is to make it as easy on the building owner to do. There's obviously already a lot that's required of the building owner on an annual basis just to do the benchmarking, let alone the BPS requirements. So we want to be able to get this information and utilize this information, but also not have it be a whole, ask a building owner to write up a full, multi-paragraph report on it. So it should be a short form when we send out, or how we're envisioning it now. There's still some work we need to do on it, but how we're envisioning it is at the beginning of each reporting season, as we typically do, we'll send out an email letting everyone know that the reporting period is open and here are the steps you need to take. It'll include a link to that, this new form on there. We'll also make it very apparent in Beam where you have to go to submit this form. And to the extent possible, we're going to make it just be checkboxes or notes, as opposed to, just a bunch of open text boxes where you have to guess what you have to say. For example, for the would you benefit from technical assistance, it will probably just be a simple yes or no checkbox. trying to make some of the other things check boxes as well. So still some work we need to do to figure out exactly how this will work, but that'll be figured out well before the next reporting period happens. And happy to take any questions you might have about this one, especially since this is not something that we brought up last time, but is a new change that has to happen. But like I said, we're working to make this as easy and as least intrusive and inconvenient for you all as possible. So now I want to go through some of the updates since the last webinar and tell you what we've been working on, what we still have to do. Like I said, our other vendor, Clearly Energy, who maintains and operates the Beam database on our behalf, they're working to update the system to allow for 2019 baseline year submissions. We're still debating if this information should only be taken in during the reporting period, like all other benchmarking information, or if we should make it open on a more rolling basis. There's pros and cons to both of them. If people have feedback or any ideas on what they might prefer, if you wanted to change your baseline to 2019, happy to hear that here, or in an email, you can always reach out. So still some things we need to figure out there, but we're first updating the system just to allow for this, since it's currently not set up to take in information before 2021. We have defined the reporting period. It'll be July 1st through November 1st annually. There might still need to be some people who sign off on that, but I don't see any reason why anyone would be against that, considering we need to have the reporting period all happen in one fiscal year. So the earliest with a November 1st end date we can make it would be July 1st. So that's almost certainly what it'll be. If something changes, we'll message you, but you should definitely plan on July 1st, 2026 as the next date where you'll be able to update your benchmarking information and pay fees, including for any reports or fees that have been missed to date. No one has been fined or, found non-compliant for benchmarking yet, but starting next year with this program in a much better place, ideally, we're going to start being more stringent about benchmarking requirements and penalties. So please take note of that. As I mentioned, the Energize Denver program is currently being reviewed for deemed compliance eligibility. Not too much to say on that until we complete that review. Don't want to, if we do ultimately find that it does not meet the same or achieve the same reductions as the state program will not be eligible for deemed compliance. But we've had some preliminary discussions with the Energize Denver team and talked about the best ways to get this information. If possible, we would like to make it just something where the Denver team or other future local jurisdiction could just send us a list of all their compliant buildings, and we would cross-reference that with our list, as opposed to having the building owner need to provide something. In the statute, there's something about the building owner needing to affirmatively, or I forget the exact wording, but it's like, it's not affirmatively affirm. That's what I want to say. It's definitely not that. It's a test. That's what it is. Affirmatively attest that they are in compliant with the local program. So there might be some small requirement for the building owner, but we're looking within the guidelines of the statute to make this happen automatically with very little to no action required on the building owner's behalf. So once we do the review and have some of that figured out, we will let you all know about the progress there, but we've put some thought into this and made some progress, at least in reviewing the program itself. As for the Building Decarbonization Enterprise Board, the interviews have been held. CEO staff that was on those interviews has made our recommendations to the governor's office. I believe they're still reviewing everything and making some decisions at their point. Of course, it's ultimately the governor's responsibility and authority to appoint people to this board. But like I said, the deadline to have the board appointed is September 1st of this year. It's August 26th right now. So that should happen within the next week. And then the board will start meeting shortly thereafter. And after the first few meetings where everyone's been introduced and talked about how the board will work and, started having the preliminary conversations and potentially votes about what the board should and the enterprise should actually be funding, we'll make that all available. We're working on standing up a building decarbonization enterprise website separate from the BPC website. And that's where, once there's more details to share, most of the information will likely be posted on the new enterprise board website. Some other things not specifically related to the new legislation, but also of note, the standard target adjustment and timeline adjustment request forms have been released, with the individualized target and the other forms forthcoming in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. So those are out now for standard target adjustment and timeline adjustment. Happy to take questions about that. Would like to focus on the legislative changes, but if people have questions about those, certainly can ask at this time. I will say that with the change to not making the 2026 targets as much of a concern, would really highly encourage everyone to focus on 2030 target and timeline adjustments. There's really no reason to request a 2026 target adjustment. It's kind of just, a waste of everyone's time and money for the most part, just because there's no penalties for non-compliance. The 2030 targets are not changing. And I think it would behoove everyone on all sides to focus on the 2030 changes. And for most of these processes, you have until the end of 2029 to make those changes. And you have until January 31st, 2031 to request a compliance pathway change for 2030. So even though that form has taken a bit longer, as we were putting together the form, noticed in Regulation 28, the rulemaking process that outlined most of the rules and requirements for this program, there are some inconsistencies in the wording, so that needs to be cleaned up before we're allowed to release the compliance pathway adjustment form. But as soon as that happens, we will release that right away. But the standard target adjustment and timeline adjustment forms have been released. Individualized target and some other forms should be uploaded in the next week or two. We've also done a lot of updates already to Beam and the BPC website. There's some more that we have planned. It just takes kind of a while to update, especially the BPC website, just because there's a lot of different layers of review and all that fun stuff that has to be accounted for. But the Beam and BPC website should both soon have a lot more information on them, be a lot more user-friendly. I know the Clearly Energy team is working really hard on a total revamp of the Beam building owner portal. So with the goal of making it a lot easier at a quick glance to see what your buildings are, how they're tracking towards compliance for benchmarking and building performance standards, see your compliance pathway, see your targets. So I think in the next few months, it'll take a while to do all of these changes, but in the next few months, you should find that both the BPC website and Beam are a lot more user-friendly and easily navigable. We're also working on updating the technical guidance in full, both to just clean some things up and to, of course, reflect the new legislation that we've been talking about. We're anticipating having this available hopefully by the end of September, fully released. It might slip a week or two, as these things often do. But the goal is to get this out at the very end of September. And so that should be a really good resource for everyone, since the technical guidance will be fully updated and reflective of the new legislation. Also created this new BPC mailing list. Julia, if you actually want to throw the link to that as well in the chat. Again, these slides will eventually be accessible on the Beam knowledge base and the recording training library, but we have a new mailing list that we're setting up. Right now, we're primarily still communicating about this program through the email addresses that we have on file in Beam, but we think this mailing list will be a lot easier when we send things out through Beam. We're unfortunately limited in the number of emails we can send on a daily basis by the Gmail daily rate limit. But if we use this mailing list, which will be through Salesforce's Marketing Cloud tool, there's no email limit, no daily limit, so we can send everything to everyone right away. And there also might be people interested in getting on the mailing list that aren't necessarily on a building or are reporting for a building owner specifically, but might be a third-party contractor or someone from another jurisdiction that just wants to stay up to date on what we're doing and what's changing and other program updates. So in the next few months, once we have more people signed up for this mailing list, we'll probably start using it there. But there's no requirement to do so. We'll always still message things through Beam just to make sure everyone has a chance to get the information. But I think the BPC mailing list will be a lot more nimble. So definitely would encourage y'all to sign up for that if you have interest. And finally, you probably got an email from Beam, I think it was last week, maybe the week before, about the Large Building Decarbonization Showcase Program. There's a lot more information forthcoming on this. I believe September 15th is when the application process will open for this. We're working on getting all of our ducks in a row for that. There's still some details to be ironed out there, but essentially what this program will be for people that want to achieve their greenhouse gas intensity reduction target, either go beyond what's required in statute or come into compliance before what's happening in statute. They'll be able to take advantage of this new federal funding grant to do some of the work there. So there's going to be a lot more webinars and informational sessions, so I don't want to get too much into the details of this now. It's not something I'm assisting with this. It's not my primary focus, but there's a lot more details about this that are forthcoming, and you should definitely keep an eye out for some of the information related to that in the not too distant future. Before we turn it over to questions, I just wanted to touch on this third-party solicitation notice. This is something that we put together with our legal team, and we're going to start posting on the Beam website, including more in emails. But we have been made aware that there are third-party solicitors reaching out to people, basically saying you need to pay us X number of dollars to submit your benchmarking information on your behalf, or the state is going to fine you, or something to that effect. CEO just wants to make it really clear. There is no requirement to pay a third party to submit benchmarking reports on your behalf. There's a lot of great companies out there that can do this for you and help with the BPF side of things. And so if you find it prudent or necessary to utilize or engage a third party contractor to do this for you, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But anyone that's preemptively reaching out to you saying you have to pay us, there's no other way for you to get this done, that just simply isn't the case. And there's a lot of correspondence that might go out claiming to come from the state, but is not actually from the state. So here's the official notice. Any physical mail that you get that's pertaining to this program will come from the CEO's address, 1600 Broadway, Suite 1960 in Denver. And the emails will almost certainly always come from email addresses ending in state.co.us, and will have CEO's official logo on them. If you ever receive correspondence related to this program from anyone and you want to just double check if it's legitimate, you can definitely contact me at my email here, and I'm happy to take a look at it and let you know if it's legit or not. If it's coming from Beam or the state or from Julia or I or someone from the Help Center, it is most likely legitimate, but especially if you're receiving third-party solicitations saying pay us or else, that really just is not the case and is not something you should feel compelled to do. Again, you can use a third party to do the benchmarking for you. That's totally fine. And there's a lot of great companies out there that do great work, but you are not required to do this as far as our program is concerned. So just wanted to make that really clear to everyone, because we've received more recent reports in the last couple weeks about this happening. So with that, I will turn it over to any questions that anyone has, and I'll leave this up just so everyone has a chance to take down our information. So you have Julia and I's emails and our work phone numbers, as well as the Help Center phone line, or the Help Center email rather. I think that you can reach out to any of us with any of these questions. If you have more basic questions just about how do I log on to Beam, how do I find this form, can you tell me my compliance status, I would definitely recommend reaching out to the Help Center, since they're usually able to get back to you more quickly on things like that. But if you have questions about the statutes or the process or anything at a higher level, that would require a staff level review or response, you can feel free to reach out to either Julia or myself. So with that, I think we'll turn it over to questions. I think Julia, I saw you responding to some in the chat as we went through it. So maybe we can just start with those, see if there's anyone that wasn't responded to by Julia.
Yeah, there's some that we haven't addressed yet.
Okay. I'll just go through the chat first, and then we'll take questions from anyone else that would like to speak up. So about CEO reviewing open exclusion requests for buildings under 50,000 square feet to be removed. Can you provide a date by which the exclusions will be reviewed? Our clients ask for status regularly. Yeah, we're pretty behind on reviewing the some of the outstanding tickets from this past reporting season, which I do apologize for. It's a pretty small team here working on a statewide program. I really wish we had some more resources and staff at our disposal. Julia coming online has really helped me delegate a lot of tasks and responsibilities. I think she's been doing a great job so far. There's just a lot of volume, frankly, and I know that might not be the answer you want, or might not be a satisfying answer, but we're trying to get to them as soon as we possibly can. I have a lot of time set aside later this week to dig into some of the ones I'm behind on, and you should expect a response within the next couple weeks. Sorry it's taken so long, very much and sincerely appreciate the patience and the flexibility. Is just, it's hard for one or two people, even with a great vendor team, to respond to, the hundreds and thousands of requests that we get. So trying to work on some processes to make it more streamlined going forward. Again, having Julie on board will help us out a lot. But you can expect a response in the next couple of weeks. And again, sorry it's taken so long. From Melissa, how is the state planning to accommodate buildings that previously did not AC and will be getting AC in the future due to increased hot days? specifically wondering about schools, since the majority of schools do not have AC. Yeah, that's a fair question. Melissa, I think in that case, one of the target adjustment processes would probably make sense for you. Probably the standard target adjustment process for those. For that process, you can ask for it for basically any reason. There's no minimum criteria of sort of request that you can make, and we can certainly take into account something like our energy use is X, but even though we've made some improvements to our building, after adding AC, our building energy use is going to go up by X amount, and so we would like a new target to account for this. So I would recommend going through the standard target adjustment process there. Julia or someone, if you want to put a link to the standard target process form or request form rather in the chat so people can access that, that might be helpful. The only thing to keep in mind there beyond, and on the form, it's outlined all the information that you have to provide. You should also note that this is only for buildings that are on one of the property type target pathways. If you're on the standard percent reduction pathway, one of them, you are not eligible for a standard target adjustment. So Melissa, I would recommend going through that first and seeing if that makes sense to you. And if you have any questions or concerns about that, you can feel free to reach out to me or Julia for some additional information. I think some of these were responded to already from Joshua. Is the enterprise fee in addition to the benchmarking fee? It is in addition to the benchmarking fee. So the existing $100 benchmarking fee is just basically to pay for basic program operations, help us pay our vendors for staff time, for server costs, for things of that nature. That's basically just to keep the lights of the program on. The enterprise fee is obviously a lot more money, but this will all be reinvested directly for building owners to take advantage of. So it is more money, but I think people will get a lot more bang for their buck for this. But yes, they are separate fees. Kwan asked, can this apply for hospitals? Kwan, if you want to follow up later about what specifically you were asking about there. Sorry, I wasn't answering questions during when I was going through the webinar, but there's a lot of things that we have available for hospitals. So if you want to follow up either in the chat or when it's time to speak and come off mute and elaborate on the questions. From Jason, are there members of the task force and other committee outside of the Denver area, other parts of Colorado? Yeah, the task force I can't speak directly to since we haven't started putting that together. Again, that's not till 2027. But as we were doing the interviews for the for the Building Decarbonization Enterprise Board, we tried to be really sensitive to geographical concerns and not have it just be Front Range and Denver folks. Obviously, that's where the majority of covered buildings are located, but Colorado is a big state, and the issues that people face in mountain towns of the Western Slope and some of the plains areas, obviously a lot different than what you might face in Denver or in other Front Range cities. So I think most of the applicants were from Front Range areas, so that limited the geographical diversity a bit. And I can't speak to exactly who's going to be on the board until the governor makes that announcement and makes their final decisions on all of that. But I think the recommendations that staff provided definitely took geographical diversity into account to the greatest extent possible. So hopefully people will see that reflected in the final composition of the board. Keith says, our name may be on the electric bill, but water or natural gas in the name of our landlord. Who would be responsible for filing since more than one name is on a utility bill? That's a very good question, Keith. That's the sort of thing that we still need to puzzle through and think through how exactly this will work. So don't have a great answer for you at this time, but that's a really good point and something that we've been talking about and considering. The goal is to make it as easy as for everyone as possible to understand what's required and to apply. It would be really annoying to have multiple people submit different applications. So maybe this would be a way where the operator could provide the electricity information to the building owner, and then the building owner reports the entire portfolio on everyone's behalf. There might be concerns or issues with that. So if you have any feedback on how you think this could work, feel free to reach out. But otherwise, it's something that we're puzzling through and we'll have a lot more guidance about before the start of the 2026 reporting period. It sounds like the enterprise fund fee is optional. No, it is not optional. It's a requirement, a statutory requirement. So if you do not pay the enterprise fee, it's the same as not paying the existing fee, and you would be found non-compliant. So it's not optional. What are the requirements that make a building a public building? I think the exact statutory language, or at least the language in the guidance, is outlined in the technical guidance. Julia, if you have a second, if you could find what it says specifically about a public building in the technical guidance or in the regulation 28 and post it here for who asked this question. For Tim, I think that might be helpful. If she can't find it, I would recommend just looking at the technical guidance or regulation 28. We can put links to both of those in the chat and seeing what it says about public buildings, but really anything that's owned or operated by a public entity. And there's some caveats and some gray area there. So you can reach out to us if you want. We can follow up about that later. I want to go through these and answer questions more related to the legislation if there are. So Jason, so per building, what the total fee bill moving forward? Yes, it'll be 500 per building per year, 400 from the Building Decarbonization Enterprise Fund, and the $100 for the basic benchmarking fee. Oh, and Julia already did what I asked her. Thank you, Julia. I should be reading that first. So Julia put the public building information for BPC defined in the chat in response to Tim's question, so would refer to that. How will medical facilities be handled? Will there be exceptions? So medical facilities are handled in the same way as any other building, really. Obviously, for hospitals and other medical facilities, they have pretty significant energy uses and, operating 24/7 in a lot of cases. So obviously there's somewhat more limited in the amount of energy that they can reduce. It's obviously important to keep the lights on and all the machines running at a hospital, no matter how hot it is or how cold it is or what time of day it is. So I think the property type targets for hospitals reflect that. And I also think that if you find that the target that you've been asked to achieve is unreasonable or infeasible for some way, many hospitals will probably qualify for some of the individualized target eligibility, which you can check out in a week or two when that is released, or if not, the standard target or timeline adjustment processes are currently available and you can look through those. So there's not specific carve-outs for hospitals or anything, but I think a lot of the target adjustment and individualized target procedures lend themselves well to account for hospital and other healthcare facility operations and, kind of the specific and unique needs for those. Kelly says, but if we submit the individualized target form now, won't we know then what our target will be for 2030? So yes, just to be clear what I meant about that, you can submit a 2030 target request or timeline adjustment request at any time. You do not have to wait until 2029 to do so. So sorry if that was unclear. All I meant was that there's different deadlines to request a 2026 adjustment and a 2030 adjustment. And all I meant was we would really recommend focusing on the 2030 adjustment because your 2026 target functionally does not really matter anymore. There's no penalties for non-compliance. We won't be reviewing that. We'll be looking and seeing how people are tracking towards it as kind of a benchmark for us, but really would encourage everyone to focus on the 2030 target. So yeah, I would recommend certainly if you're ready to submit those targets once we have everything, or those requests once we have everything released, you certainly don't have to wait until the end of 2029 to request that. I was just saying focus on 2030 target requests as opposed to 2026 requests. So yes, if you're ready to submit a 2030 request, feel free to do that as soon as you would like to. Will this new grant funding be open to public buildings? I think you were talking about the large building decarbonization showcase grant. I'm actually not 100% sure. I have to go back and double check, honestly. It's supposed to be for buildings that have a greenhouse gas intensity target and need to meet BPC targets, and public buildings are kind of in a weird spot for that, whereas they don't have they have to comply with benchmarking requirements, but they don't have to pay any fees and they don't have to meet any building performance targets unless they undergo a large renovation. So I'm not sure if the public buildings are eligible for the large building decarbonization showcase grant. They might be. They will not be eligible for the building decarbonization enterprise fee, however, since public buildings don't have to pay the fees, and so it wouldn't be fair for public buildings to utilize the funding that's being paid into by people that have to pay into it. So the building decarbonization enterprise public buildings will not be eligible for the large building decarbonization showcase program. They might be. I have to double check on that. However, I will say there are a lot of programs that we have available for public buildings, including the energy performance contracting program. If you're not familiar with that, I would definitely check that out. That's something that a lot of public buildings and especially schools have found really useful and a really good model to work with. So I would definitely recommend checking out the energy performance contracting program if you're a public building. Oh, and Julia already responded to this. Will the new, she said it will be open to public buildings, assuming that means, just to be clear, that's the large building decarbonization showcase will be open for public buildings. The building decarbonization enterprise will not. From Vincent, if a building is in Denver, will it also have to meet the GHG requirements for the decarbonization grant, or can it still apply to the Colorado grant and only do Denver compliance? That is a really good question, Vincent. I think that's something we have to make clear before we put this out. Our main person who's been working on this has been out of the office for a couple weeks, but she's back tomorrow, and we're going to discuss some of the final items. I think that's really interesting. I'm not sure if that's been thought through. So that's a really good question. Sorry, I don't have a great answer for you on the top of my head about that. And it's kind of hard to answer until we do the Denver, compliance review. But that's a very good and very fair question. So we'll definitely get back to you on that one. That's something that we should make clear in our application materials when those are released September 15th. Jackie says, we charge 11 electric vehicles that we didn't have back in 2019 or 2020. How do we get that factored into our baseline or target? Sure. So there's a specific carve outs in the rulemaking for electric vehicle charging. So if you are able to sub-meter the energy in the electric chargers, and so you don't have to report the energy consumption associated with EV chargers at all. And so that would, if you're not reporting those now, you can just sub-meter those and never have to report anything associated with EV chargers. If you're not able to sub-meter or otherwise disentangle the energy use associated with the EV chargers from your reporting, there's actually a specific carve out for individualized targets for those buildings. So we'll have the individualized target form set out pretty soon. If you're not able to sub-meter EV charging, you'll just have to provide some basic information about how much energy is being used by the EV chargers and a couple other pieces of documentation. And then you'll get a new adjusted target that takes your EV charging into account. Though, again, the easiest way is just to sub-meter them and then not report that energy information at all. So hopefully that helps, Jackie. You can feel free to follow up if you have more questions. But yeah, if you can't sub-meter them or otherwise disentangle it, we'll look at the individualized target form when that's released pretty soon. Scott Goldhammer, hey Scott, wasn't able to join the session right away. I see it's being recorded and transcribed. Where can we find the recording and transcription? Yes, so that will be on the Beam recorded training library. I believe Blake or Julia at the very top. I'm not sure if you joined late, if you're able to see the meeting chat. So maybe just to be safe, Blake, could you repost the links to the recorded training library and the first webinar? So Scott, the slides should be posted there pretty soon, and then it usually takes about a week to get the video file posted onto the recorded training library. But that's where you can go to see all the recorded trainings, both for this meeting and for the one we held previously about on the same topic on the 17th, and anything else that we've done. So we'll definitely check that out. Jackie asks, and when the forms will be released to change our pathway selection. As I mentioned, we were about to release it and then noticed that Regulation 28 actually had referenced the wrong section in it. And so there needs to be a slight change to that language before we're able to release it. So that was pretty frustrating for everyone involved, myself included. So that should hopefully be taken care of soon. And probably in a month or two, we'll be able to release the compliance pathway selection form. So sorry that's taken a little bit longer than we wanted to, but there just needs to be some clerical changes made before we're legally allowed to do that. So we'll send out an email when that happens, but definitely check back in like maybe a month and a half for that. Okay, Daquan, you did follow up. Thank you. Hospitals are among the highest energy use facilities in Colorado, yet many are nonprofit and don't qualify for financing tools like CPACE that commercial buildings can access. From a policy standpoint, how is Building Performance Colorado addressing this gap to ensure hospitals who can't compromise patient care for compliance still have realistic and sustainable pathways to meet performance standards? Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I would definitely say taking advantage of either the individualized target, the if you qualify for one of those, the timeline target or the timeline adjustment request, or the standard target adjustment request. I think those would be what I would recommend to Quan, because then your targets will be more realistic and take into account all the different challenges and requirements that hospitals and healthcare facilities have to go through. Obviously, like you mentioned, some don't qualify for CPACE, which can be obviously a limiting factor. That's a really great program, but if you're not able to take advantage of that, it doesn't do you much good. And then there might be an ability to have some hospital-specific funding through the Building Decarbonization Enterprise funding, if that's how the board votes, or if not something specific for hospitals, at least some additional programs and financing that you'd be able to take advantage of. And I think the large building decarb showcase grant that I just mentioned, once that is fully up and running, you might consider taking a look at that and seeing if that makes sense and is something that you'd be eligible to do, because there'll be quite a bit of money made available for people. The barrier to entry is fairly high. There's a cost match requirement and some other things and some stuff to be aware of there. But I think your point is well taken. I think those are totally fair concerns, and it's something that we'll keep working on. And the nonprofits, there's also an under-resourced building form that we're going to release soon, which nonprofits would be eligible for. We're still debating the exact intent of the rulemaking and trying to release a form that has as little, barrier to entry for under-resourced buildings as possible. Really hoping to get that released soon, and that might be something that nonprofits of any sort will be able to take advantage of. So would definitely recommend that. Really, we have a lot more planned for nonprofits and equity buildings. Unfortunately, a lot of it was tied up in federal funding that's somewhat in limbo right now. So some of the things that we wanted to do have been pushed back as a result of that, and we're still working to do things. But obviously, when a large chunk of money that you were hoping to have is potentially inaccessible, that raises some issues and some delays. So, but your points are very well taken, and it's something that we'll keep thinking about. Ryan asks, will there be rebates provided for energy audits conducted for target adjustments for buildings outside of Denver? I believe currently there are some utility incentives for audits that you can certainly look into, both from Excel, I believe, has this. Some of the other utilities across the state have some incentives or rebates for audits. This is something that I would expect the Building Decarbonization Enterprise Board, once convened, will discuss making available to people. I can't say for sure it will. Obviously, I'm not a voting member. I won't be voting on it. I'll make my opinions clear at the board meetings, but ultimately how that funding will be utilized again will be determined on what the actual voting members say. But I know that's something a lot of people have brought up, and I think it will definitely be discussed. I can't say for sure if audit rebates will be included as something from the enterprise board, but I know there are some utility incentives available for that you might check out, and the board will certainly consider making that available for audits as well once we start meeting on that. Is the change to the 2019 baseline required? Again, no, this is not required. This is only if you think 2019 is a better year for you. Obviously, 2019 is pre-COVID. In calendar year 2021, a lot of buildings were not, and frankly are still not, at their full capacity and operating as fully intended at full occupancy. And so if you think that the 2019 baseline is a better representation of how your building actually is at a true baseline state, you can submit this. And again, this is only for people that have opted into one of the standard percent reduction pathways. As you mentioned, Melissa, some utilities might not keep their records back that far. And so maybe this change won't be as useful as we initially hoped, but for people that meet that criteria and want to change their information and have their utility bills from 2019 in hand, it's possible. But no, it is not a requirement. Just going through from John, where do people go to find out how to reduce our emissions and begin meeting our goals? So I think the technical guidance is a good starting point that outlines what the targets are for the building types. and that has some useful links for different resources. There's also a lot of things that we have available on the different Colorado Energy Office websites for everything from, heat pump tax credits to geothermal energy things to energy performance contracting, to some of the other incentives and rebates that are available depending on what your building is, how far it needs to go to meet their goals, etc. Julia may or may not have posted some of those things already, but Julia, if you haven't, if you could post some of the links to different to the resources that we have available, I think that would be a really good help for John and other people that are wondering about this. If you go into your building owner portal on Beam, there's all the information about where your building currently stands. I think there's some really great federal tools like Audit Template, Asset Score, Better. Those are all free federal tools that are available to help people understand at a basic level where their building is at, how far they have to go to meet performance targets or just to improve their energy efficiency and emissions reductions in general, and some different technologies and strategies and incentives that you might consider to get there. I would also definitely recommend checking out the CPACE program, which for qualifying entities connects people that are doing large scale, or not even large scale, but really any sort of energy efficiency or sustainability, resilience, energy efficiency, or emissions reductions project. There's a lot of financing available at really low interest rates through the CPACE program that you might check out. And as I mentioned, one of the things that we're working on is consolidating all these resources and making them more apparent and better, both within Beam and on the BPC website, just so people can take advantage of this more. And we're also looking to put together a list of registered contractors, because right now a lot of people reach out saying, hey, I think I understand what I need to do. Who are some companies that can help me with this? And just in the interest of fairness and competitiveness, even though there's a lot of companies in mind I would like to recommend, I'm not allowed to, because that favors one company over another. So we are trying to put together a registered contractor list for this program. So there's people that have been vetted and trained by CEO on all aspects of this program and of our other programs and financing opportunities and how to use Beam and all that sort of stuff. There'll be a list of registered contractors that you'll be able to talk to and access. That's something that takes a while to put together, but we've started on that and should hopefully see that come online in the next couple months. So there's a lot of different things. John, you can feel free to reach out to me separately, and I can provide some of those resources directly. Like I said, we're trying to do a better job of making this more apparent and more easily accessible on our website. We're at time. I'll go through the last couple questions. If there's questions that you still have but weren't able to get to, feel free to send it to Julia or I via email, and we will follow up afterwards. But I will go through the last few that are in the chat right now, just since people asked them. Do you have to select a compliance pathway before requesting an adjustment to the target? So if you never selected a pathway proactively after June 1st, 2024, I believe it was, you were actually automatically assigned and defaulted into in most cases, the energy efficiency property type target pathway with an EUI reduction. So you do have a pathway assigned to you. If you do want to change your pathway, you'll have an opportunity to do so later. But you don't have to select one if you didn't already, since you would have been defaulted into one already. So if you want to change your pathway for one reason or another, like I said, just because of the rulemaking, we have to wait to release that form. But if you never selected one, you should have been automatically assigned one based on your building type, and can submit adjustments and requests as needed based on that. If I understood correctly, the data center exemption process has not been finalized, but clarify below. Yeah, so there's a lot that we still need to put together here. Jason, to be clear, for whole building data centers, your standard data center, there is a target process already for those. That is the power usage effectiveness target, or PUE form, wherein you have to just provide an ASHRAE level 2 audit or equivalent audit, as well as all the energy information and energy consumption for the entire building and the energy consumption for ITs and server equipment specifically. And based on that, you'll be assigned a PUE target that you have to meet and maintain. So the new process is for buildings that have a data center or telecommunications equipment incorporated into them. That's not been defined. But if you're a whole building data center and qualify for the PUE, that form and process is already available, and I would recommend going through that. And all these other questions here are things that we still need to figure out and know. And just to be clear, it won't be an exemption for the data center. It'll rather just be assigning you a blended and individualized target that accounts for the energy consumption and projected growth of the data center portion of the building, while still making it clear that there needs to be some sort of energy efficiency or energy or emissions reduction component of it. So all the questions that you outlined here will be detailed as we go through the process, but I don't have much more to say about that at this time.
Do you know when those might be released?
Yeah, there's a whole process we need to go through for that. So it's not going to be in the immediate future, but hopefully by sometime late fall, early winter, I would expect some more details on that.
Okay, great.
But yeah, these are good questions, and we're capturing all these questions, and I'll make sure that the 4 bullet points that you put here are addressed in some form or fashion in the final guidance that we put out. From Jessica, to correct improper portfolio manager inputs like building area, other things, do these need to be addressed formally via the target adjustment process? And if so, do these types of corrections require an energy audit? No. So if there's things in your reporting that are just not correct, during the reporting period, how it works during the reporting period is if you set up your portfolio manager account properly to share with Beam, the state's database, all the information that you put into portfolio manager just flows in automatically and is put in there into the state's database for our tracking purposes. If there's something that needs to be corrected or is changed from previous, you can just put that in there. You're able to, if you have sub-meters for certain things, you can sub-meter that. You can add the meters directly in Portfolio Manager, and then all that information flows correctly into our database, and it accounts for that. So if there's something that's you've reported previously, or is just that was either wrong on your end, or for some reason is not reflected properly in the state's database, and it's just a simple correction rather than making a change or adjustment, you just need to change that information during the reporting season and make sure it's all properly reflected there. Just to change, like if we have your building listed as, let's say, 75,000 square feet, and it's actually 62,000 square feet, you can just make that request to us via the help center. You can just say, hey, you have it wrong in your system. It should actually be this. And then you can just make sure that's correct in Portfolio Manager. But for a change of that nature, you don't need to do a target adjustment or provide that additional information. If you're simply correcting something that's wrong, you can just let us know, and we might ask for some documentation about that. But you don't need to go through the target adjustment process just to account for something that's wrong either in Portfolio Manager or in the state's database.
Would that include a retail store now becoming a restaurant, for example?
Yeah, so this is something we've actually talked a lot about recently, and to try to understand. So there's kind of 2 different scenarios here with the building types. So if your building previously was, like you said, retail space and is now becoming a restaurant, that does require a target adjustment. However, if your building is listed as a retail space, but it's actually a restaurant, and so basically nothing has changed at your building, it's more just that we have the wrong information, then you can just ask us to change it. And we might need some documentation just to support that. But if you're not undergoing like a renovation or a new tenant has moved in or something that has changed the use of the type, then you can just make that request of us. But if there's, a renovation or it previously actually was retail space and is now a restaurant, that would require a target adjustment, if that makes sense. Just a couple more that I'll go through. Andrew asks, we are a specialty food processor and food distributor. Our building does not align with buildings in Appendix A, and so the standard percent pathway seems to make sense for us. We brought on a large production line in 2022 that significantly increased our energy usage above 2021 or 2019 baseline. We are not able to use the target adjustment form. So what are our options? I would say there, if you do not align with the build, if you don't have a building type that is listed in Appendix A, then you would be eligible for an individualized target, Andrew. So I would say once that form is released, which again should be either end of this week or sometime next week, I would check that individualized target, just provide form, see the information that's listed there. And if you apply, or if you are eligible for that, then I would then request an individualized target, because that is specifically open for buildings that don't have a defined property type that's listed in Appendix A of the technical guidance. So that is probably the best pathway for you there.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, just one more question from Jackie. We want to submit for the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, CPRG, but it requires a different pathway than we chose. We have to submit for the grant by November 3rd. If the form to change our pathway selection is not available then, what do you suggest we do? So very good question, Jackie. We actually, luckily, the wonderful Brittany already accounted for this in some of the information that she is putting together. And so we're going to release the, RFA, which is the request for application and all the information you need to apply on September 15th when the first round opens. And so if two of the requirements to be eligible for this grant are A, that you're on one of the greenhouse gas pathways, and that you're fully up to date on your benchmarking information. However, if you are not currently fully up to date on benchmarking and or are not in one of the GHGI pathways, you'll still be eligible to apply. It will just have to be, it'll be in the contractual language, it'll say something to the effect, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so it won't be this verbatim, don't quote me on this, but it'll say something to the effect of, this building is not currently in compliance with benchmarking standards and is not currently on a GHGI pathway. However, it's working on that, and so it might just be that some of the grant funding will not be fully accessible until you can show that you're on the new pathway and are fully up to date with benchmarking, but this won't completely prevent you from applying. It'll just kind of change some of the timing in which you get the full amount of funding. But if you're not on the GHGI pathway now and you're not able to change it, before the first round of applications are due, you can still go through it, and it'll just be noted in the contract that some of the money will be held back until that happens. So that's a totally good question, but because there's been so many issues with getting the benchmarking information and allowing people to come into compliance, as well as the delay of this pathway selection form, it didn't make sense and wouldn't be fair to keep people out of the program for those reasons. So if you find yourself in that position, Jackie, at that time, you will still be eligible to apply for the new grant. And just to be clear, CPRG and Large Building Decarbonization Showcase, it's the same program. The CPRG is the name of the overall EPA award that is the basis for this funding. And then the program that Colorado is putting together is Large Building Decarbonization Showcase. But either of those things, CPRG or LBD, LBDS, Large Building Decarb Showcase, all the same program, just to make that clear. But to reiterate your actual question, you'll still be able to apply. You might just have some of the funding held back until you can prove that those things have been handled. Okay, so with that, we're going to call it here. Thanks for staying a little bit over time. Again, if you have any questions that weren't answered today, or if you want any further information or feedback on anything specifically about the legislation, but really anything about the program, you can reach out to me or Julia if you have more basic questions about how to, figure out where things are or submit certain forms or see compliance status, things of that nature. Would recommend reaching out to the Help Center. And again, these slides and this recording will be available on Beam in a matter of days. So we'll probably have another one of these sessions in a couple months once we've made some more progress, but nothing else planned for now. So feel free to reach out again with any questions, comments, concerns. There's been a lot that we've worked on since we last talked and a lot more we have planned. So there's still some things in flux right now, but I think especially before the beginning of the next reporting period in July, I think this program will be in a really good place with a lot more clarity and financing and funding opportunities available for everyone. So thanks again for everyone for being here today. Thanks to the ICF team and Julia for assisting me. And yeah, hope you all have a great day. Thanks.